We're here now with the Rams head coach, Sean McVay. Sean, really appreciate you having us here.
Yeah, I'm glad I've been a fan of the show. I've been getting on you for a couple years, so it's finally nice to be on here with you.
You've got so much stuff going on. I feel bad infringing on your time, but I'm very glad.
No, I've always enjoyed it. It's whether I'm working out or even watching film. And shoot, man, you obviously, I respect the work you put in. I can tell you study the game, and the guys that you have on and the people that you have on are people that are working at it. I respect and appreciate that.
What was it like to coach one of the best players of all time?
The first thing that I would say, the first word that comes to mind, it was a blessing. What makes Aaron great was the accumulation of consistent days back to back to back to back. He never had an off day. He was always on. He was always locked in. He always had a purpose. The thing that I love the most about the guy, you hear him talk, and everybody's like, well, he's still playing at a first-team All-Pro level, one of the best players in the world, and there's no doubt about it. Why are you stepping away from the game? And when you hear him articulate what he puts into it, he's year-round. You know, this isn't just an in-season job for him. This is a year-round job, and the way he works at it and the mental, physical, and emotional toll it takes on him. He's the most consistent guy. I think consistency is the truest measurement of performance. I appreciate our relationship. He let me into his life, and that's something that I cherish more than anything we were able to accomplish. But he's a blessing, and I'll tell him about, you know, how he always modeled the way. And then the coolest thing about Aaron is when you really get to know him, the most important things in the world are being a great father to his 4 beautiful kids and a great husband, you know, to Erica, and, you know, the loyalty of his family. But he never changed. He was so consistent, and I mean that in the most positive way. And he was all about the right stuff, man. Like, he just wanted to win a championship so bad. He wanted to elevate people around him. And it was really cool to see last year the joy that he played with. Like, I knew, you know, he didn't need to tell me. I knew it was his last year. I just know when you're connected with somebody, you watch them taking in moments and cherishing things and savoring things that are reflective of kind of knowing I'm observing somebody that's taking it in because they know this is probably the last time I'm going to be doing something that's meant a whole lot to me and been a big part of my life. And so I can't say enough good things about that guy. But I'll tell you what is pretty cool is even it started this past off season. You can make story, you know, I think storytelling is a great way to illustrate your points with the players. There's always a story that you can, you know, personify with him in terms of the things that we want to be about.
What's your favorite one? What's the one you think you go to the most when you think about him?
You know, I think early on in our relationship, you know, I remember one of the things that he said when I asked him, and I met with him at the Four Seasons. I met with him and Jared Goff before I got the job. And I remember he's looking at me like, no way, this guy's going to be the next head coach. But I said, you know, what do you think the things that we need to do to, you know, take the steps to improve? And the one word he said was accountability. And so we didn't have really many rules, but we did have, you know, one rule, and that was be on time. Be where you're supposed to be when you're supposed to be there. If a meeting starts at 8 o'clock and you're there at 7:59 and 59 seconds, then you're good. If you're there at 7:55, but, you know, you're there before 8 o'clock. And so Aaron was so disciplined and detailed in that. And a couple weeks into the season, we had started off on Wednesdays. We'd start off where the defense would meet first at 8 o'clock and the offense would be lifting. Aaron came in the meeting a little bit late, and he was like 30 seconds late. And I said, where were you? And he was taking a shit. And he said, I was using the bathroom. And so, you know, I said, all right, well, I'm not going to find you. He said, no, you're going to find me. I wasn't on time. And he made me find him for being late. But, you know, he never asked anybody to do anything he wasn't willing to do. I think the stories that you see is, I mean, there's not any one moment because he does so many unique things on a daily basis. But I think just, you know, what is really cool is that he had his moment in terms of the NFC Championship and the Super Bowl, where this guy just wanted to win a ring and be a part of a championship team with his teammates, with his coaches. And for him to have 2 defining moments that closed out both of those games, where he forces a turnover in the NFC Championship and then he forces an errant throw on 4th and 1, those are those legacy moments, and it's pretty cool for him to have that. And when we're watching him in Canton 5 years from the day he retires, those will be the things that are playing, and he'll be crying, and it'll be cool, and I'll be probably crying in the stands.
That's what all great players hope for.
Yeah.
Is those moments where they're just going to be burned into time.
No
I was
doubt.
there. I mean, I remember watching it happen in real time.
It was funny. It's not exactly a great prediction, but it was cool that, you're mic'd up and you have a feeling. Now, it's not like, oh, wow, you really went out on a limb. Aaron Donald's going to make a play. But it was a cool thing, because our relationship meant so much, and he was so, like, when you have players like him, earning their respect and building a real relationship that's way bigger than football, that to me is the most important thing in coaching. And we had that, and that's why it's like, when people say, well, you're going to try to convince him to come back, that would be disrespectful. If he wanted to, he'd let me know, but there was such a respect that I had for when he sat there the day after the Detroit game and looked at me and said, I'm full, I'm complete. And I said, you're damn right you are, man. And you've earned the right to feel that way. And what a cool thing that is for him. And what a blessing it was to coach him for 7 years.
You guys did such an intentional job building everything around Aaron on defense, where you're creating matchups for him, you're creating one-on-ones for him. When you remove him from the equation, what happens next? Do you find the next guy that you're trying to build that around? Is it Kobe Turner, or do you have to change your mindset about the structure of who you are?
You do. You look at it as you can't ever expect anybody to do things Aaron did. And I'll tell you what, even last year, it was like, I used to sell him on some stuff. You try to get him isolated, and he's about as automatic as it gets if you can elicit a one-on-one. Teams have made up more creative protections and unsound things where you're putting backs on edge rushers to make sure that you're getting 4 and sometimes 6 hands on him. But what he did a great job of was he always elicited the attention, so then you could do things to counter that. We don't have the luxury to do that anymore. We don't have the luxury of having a guy that is, in essence, Michael Jordan of the defensive line. We've got some really good players, but there's a philosophical approach that we believe in, Coach Shula, and what we'll do defensively. We believe in to play defense, but to expect anybody to play like Aaron Donald, to do the things he did, to impact the game the way that he did, to affect his teammates the way that he did, that's not fair to put that on anybody. But I am really excited and encouraged about the opportunity for us to see what that looks like. I'm so grateful for everything that he did. But I think we got some young guys that have a chance. I think Kobe Turner's a really good player, you mentioned. We've got some other young guys. I think Bobby Brown made a really good jump last year, and I'm expecting that much more from him. We drafted Braden Fisk and a Tyler Davis. And then on the edges, I think Byron Young is going to take a major leap. I thought Michael Hoyt is a really versatile player that we can do a better job even utilizing his skill set to not put him in some of the harder downs that he was in last year. And I'm really excited about Jared Verse and what we can do with that front, what that looks like. And how it really unfolds organically. And we're excited about, I thought that it was a really good spring, Robert. I really enjoyed watching those guys get better. You can't put the pads on, and I'm looking forward to getting to camp next week and really getting this thing rolling.
Yeah, well, we're deep in July.
I know you get those good butterflies. That's the one thing about having a son too. Usually I'm kind of chomping at the bit to go back. I'm cherishing and savoring moments while still making sure that I'm getting sharp, on the ball while you try to take a break, and you've had probably a couple too many cocktails as well.
At what point after you guys lost the Patriots in the Super Bowl, you said that you coached like an amateur against Belichick?
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask you about this because I feel like we just expect instantaneous results from head coaches and play callers.
Sure.
How do you get better as a play caller? Like, what does that process
Failure
actually look like?
I think you get better through failure, through experience. What's interesting is when I say I coach like an amateur, what I meant by that, and I give a ton of credit to those guys, I think the really good coaches, I think they see the game live, they make adjustments, they're able to be present. It was just a lot. It went really fast. I don't think we had a lot of success offensively, but I don't know that we had been through enough experience to have to figure out the solves and to know those solves in real time. Now, it's about the players being able to execute it, but I try to take a lot of pride, and we try to take a lot of pride as a coaching staff in providing solutions and giving players the best opportunity to succeed. And that wasn't provided for our guys on the biggest stage. And that was, it was almost like a moment where, these games, you feel like there's almost a calm and a stillness and a clarity in your decision making, and that didn't exist for me. And it was too, that moment, too big for me, whatever. I didn't coach good enough to win that game for a football team. I let our team down. And that is what was, failure is really the only moments that real growth occurs. I believe that. Like, I don't think I've ever gotten better from really success. I think you learn and you can really, but you don't find out about people until they fail. And there were some good things about that response, and there was a lot of things that I thought was the right response that wasn't in alignment with the coach or the person I wanted to be really for the next few years. And up until 2022, I didn't get exposed to the point where you were, at least, having to really take a step back and say, who the heck do I want to be for the people that I love and care about? And not just the coach, but in every part of your life.
Looking at that.
What was your take on it?
Yeah,
Like when you ask that question, because I know how thought out you are, but in regards to like when you see whether it's young play callers or early head coaches, what's your take on that?
It's interesting because I think that there is a period where you need that first year of special. Totally. The first guy that comes to mind for me is Bobby Sloan, right? Houston does a fantastic job last year. They're consistently putting their guys in positions.
Yeah, he did an amazing job.
And then, but you run into a roadblock, you run into a buzzsaw. And I think that period in the offseason, when you can kind of take a breath and say, all right, where are the weak points in this?
Yeah.
That to me is the most interesting. And I'm wondering if you feel this way. Do you think year 1 to year 2 is the most interesting part of that process? Or do you think it's just a matter of when that adversity comes? Because you guys didn't really have that.
Correct.
You rolled through year.
You're exactly right. I think it takes those adverse moments that cause reflection. We never really had it in year 1, And there is an element, too, of I think there's some real things behind, how much tape do you have out there? Because these defensive coordinators are so good now in terms of, all right, what's your identity? I think the best guys evolve. You look at these coaches that I respect, and I thought Bobby was incredible. You could see Bobby has an understanding of the defensive side of the football with the way that they set things up, and I was incredibly impressed with the job that he did. You look at Kyle, and what I've respected as much as anything about Kyle is the way that Kyle has continued to evolve and what his offense looks like now compared to what it did. There's still similar philosophical approaches, but it's very different in terms of in alignment with his experiences, but also the landscape of the league and how you're attacking defenses. But I think it's all individually predicated on what is your experience. That moment happened Chicago, Philly in 18. And then it was really, exposed and illustrated on a high stage in the New England game. Then the next year, though, we weren't nearly as good offensively, and there was still some evolution and things like that. It looked a little bit different in 20. It looked different in 21. 22 was a humbling year. So I think if I tell our guys repetition is the mother of learning, well, then it is for you as a coach as well. And experience and having those experiences, if you can really reflect and take it the right way, not living in the past, but using the past to be able to learn and move forward and be present right here, right now. That's what I think the best guys do. And I think some of them have the ability to accelerate it faster than others. And some are fortunate enough to get experience at an early age. Like, that's what I don't take for granted, is being able to say we've got 7 years of inventory to now draw on good things, some bad things, what are the learnable things, and then what does it look like with the personnel that we have, while also being cognizant of how do you want to move the football and score points based on what defenses are doing.
That game felt, and that stretch, right? You talk about Chicago, you talk about Philly, you talk about some of the things Detroit did to you guys that year. That stretch of games and what the Patriots did specifically felt a little bit like a harbinger of what was going to come on defense over the next few years. Mm-hmm. If you look back over the last 5 seasons, what do you think the most important shift in defensive football has been in the NFL that's made you rethink how you have to approach it?
Well, I think the biggest thing that, and I've heard you talk about it before, is this uptick in, people are smart now. So everybody's always made a big deal about, other than points, the biggest indicator is turnovers. Well, after that, it's explosives. And so you've seen a difference in philosophical coverage contours. Vic Fangio obviously was one of the guys that was at the forefront of it. And, you want to know what the heck their rules are. What are they doing? How are you trying to attack it? And I think putting a roof over the coverage, or however you want to look at it, being able to overlap and change the math in a positive way, even some of the upticks of simulated fire zones. But I would say coverage-wise, forcing play callers to be more patient running the football. I think, there's still some coaches that believe it, but the old school adage, and it's not even old school because it's not right or wrong, but I think you've seen a pivot where most of the time, every defensive coach or just the defensive philosophy you would have is the first thing is stop the run, and now you're really seeing, yeah, of course you want to stop the run, but those 3-yard gains, if then we can have a 2-yard gain or find a way to be able to get a 0-yard gain, those aren't going to get us beat as much as the 40-yard explosive or catching a slant for 25 or a high cross when we're in a pre-rotated single high defense and we're asking a weak side hook player to be able to carry these crossing routes and also fit an inside gap, So there's just different ways that I think people have found a way to still try to be sound against the run, but have better body presence from depth against the pass. And it takes a lot longer to manipulate and develop some of these routes where the explosives can occur.
It feels like, there was a world in the post-Seattle 3 world where there's regulated coverages. We talked about this, where teams were fairly regulated. That was the meta of how defensive football was played in the NFL. And now we've gotten to this place where there's almost no regulation. You're looking at even teams that come from that world, like the amount of quarters that Saleh tree now plays. It's so hard to get a beat on people. So when you guys were playing in 17 and 18, and you could just say, well, we run shit out of the ball. So we're going to be able to use a ton of play action. We're going to get people in single high, and we're just going to be able to battle all these cover 3 beaters and hammer people over the head. That went away.
It did.
And so as that happened, and you had to tap into plays that had more options because you didn't understand what coverages could happen, how did that inform the way you guys wanted to play in 2020?
Well, I think the main thing, too, is especially if you're talking about the pass game and how these coverages are doing a good job of shutting down some of your max protection play passes, you got to use all 5 eligibles. And how that's illustrated. And you have to, I've never been a part of a good offense, and I've never seen a really good offense that can't do both. And what I mean by that is run and throw the football. You have to be able, if they're going to do one thing, they are leaving something susceptible to the other. And it goes both ways. It's a give and take, and it goes back and forth. But I just think it's so key and critical that if you're so reliant on one phase of your offense, or even if you're just so limited in regards to, I can only run the ball this way, and if they take that down by giving us edges and preventing our ability to be able to run out of bubble or whatever it is, now it's well, shit, what are we going to do? And so I think you want to have an identity, but you also want to have enough complementary mixers based on the different things that people can do to distribute 11 people, whether they're sending them forward, whether they're using them in coverage. And I think over the 7 years, there's been a lot of trial and error and solves that we've had to learn. And there still is always learning. That's what you love. But this game is cyclical. It goes in cycles. And so, but the one thing is that this is a player's game. And the players and guys winning those isolated and individual matchups. But it's been informed. It's been adjusted. And even last year, and we've talked about it, when we were sitting there before training camp last year, I thought that, we would do some different things, but, what we evolved to, I would have never really known that. I think you have to have an open mind to really understanding and identifying what are your players' strengths. How can you have an identity, but make sure that you got the mixers, but you're not the jack of all trades, master of none. And that's something that I always have to say to myself, and you and I were talking about it earlier, because there's so much good ball that's at your fingertips through these different avenues that you can just click a button and it's easy to get this cut up sorted from around the league, even in college now. And so what do you want to be, and then how do you want to attack the given defense that you're going against that week? And then what are your all-purpose plays that you can carry throughout the season that guys can get really good about executing no matter what the defensive structure is?
It's really interesting because, remember we talked last year, we was talking about, again, just kind of the way the league was headed and the lack of explosives. There were a lot of off-schedule plays leading to those explosives. You don't have an off-schedule quarterback, but you still have a quarterback who allows you to thrive in this new world. What about his skill set specifically do you think aligns with how good offensive football and explosive offensive football has to be played?
Well, we were talking about it, and you were, showing some of the amazing throws. Matthew gives us the ability to activate all parts of the field, which is a big deal. Not a lot of guys can make throws from inside the pocket where you're sliding, you're moving to your left, and then you're throwing across your body on a 20-yard tight out route in coverage. So he can do that. And then we can change the spot with him. He's more athletic. He's been playing tennis. He's like Alcaraz, navigating the pocket. But he's more athletic than he's given credit for. And even though he's not going to really, run for it a lot on some of these drop back plays, you can change the launch point with him where you're making those rushers a little uncertain of it's not going to be at that 7.5-yard depth right in that A-gap cylinder all the time in terms of where he's delivering the football. And his ability to be able to change his arm slot and move and manipulate people when he does get imminent edge rush on some of those keepers, that allows us to be able to, really threaten different parts of the field and put people in some run-pass conflicts. And so he gives us the opportunity in a different way to maybe, make some off-schedule plays, but activate all parts of the field. The best offenses make you defend the width and depth of the field, and he gives us the ability to do that.
Yeah, it's not off.
Sorry about that. That's our dog getting...
It's funny because even if it's not necessarily off schedule, I think one of the things that has crept up to me with guys who have really changed the game from that position, it's about being able to access things that maybe aren't the first read or the first option of the play. And that's consistently what he's able to give you. And I think that it's kind of made me rethink what we need out of the position. You don't need a guy who's necessarily going to be running around making a lot of plays outside the pocket. But if you don't have somebody who can access something outside of the basic structure of what you're doing, you're just going to be in a box that limits you a little bit too much against modern defense.
Yeah, and I think, the thing about these really good quarterbacks like our guy, their brain works so quickly where, they're beating you with their brain and their physical abilities, and he can get through progressions. You see these defensive coaches are doing such a good job of mixing up coverages and changing the math in a positive way, and whether you're getting 4 or 5 out, the guys that can get through and exhaust all eligibles, those guys give you a chance. And Matthew certainly is one of those guys. And I think when you really look at these guys that are the elite players, they put pressure on the defense, and the guys that can beat you from the pocket, they exhaust progressions, they can eliminate quickly, and they're able to stay balanced. And when they do reset, they can maintain a base to be able to deliver the ball accurately with stuff at their feet, because I think that's the biggest difference between when you watch college tape and you watch pro tape is I want to see what it looks like when the pocket's dirty. Because that to me is the separator in this league. You show me a great quarterback and a guy that's played at a consistent, Pro Bowl caliber level, for a handful of years. I'll show you a guy that when he's getting an interior push or he's getting edges, he's got to feel to navigate the pocket, and he doesn't necessarily need a perfect platform to be able to accurately deliver the football on time and in rhythm.
I think people don't really have a good enough understanding or a deep understanding of how different it is to play quarterback now compared to what it was like in the Peyton Manning, Tom Brady era 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Because we were talking about this a little bit before we started recording, where there was a time where you'd be making decisions based on, all right, well, if it's cover 1 or cover 2, I'm going to this side. If it's cover 3, I'm going to this side. Can you just explain to people how far the current NFL is from that world and why we've arrived here?
Yeah, and these guys, there's been an evolution. There was still some really high caliber stuff. Some of the stuff that Peyton was just absolutely dicing people with throughout the course of his career, those are still concepts. But what that looks like to alleviate some stress, whether that's off of receivers or based on, hey, this looks like quarters, but it's really a 3-deep coverage and that hook player is catching that route from depth. And so I think you've got to distribute the field differently. I think coverages are doing a good job of understanding what is the typical spacing of the way that they're being attacked. Like, they understand the issues. And so in a lot of instances, when I first got into this league, and I haven't been doing it long, but you'd be able to say, like, okay, I'm going to get into a 2-by-2 formation. One side, all right, you're going to work versus a single high look. The other side, you're going to work versus a cover 2 or a quarters look. And these are what you would call pick-a-side plays. It's so hard to ask guys to do that because pre-snap, you don't know what the coverage is. And sometimes post-snap, you don't know what the coverage is unless the route distribution allows it to declare accordingly.
That makes me feel better when I'm looking at stuff and
and what's funny is like, if you ask a lot of these defensive coaches, like, unless the route's illustrated to unfold in a manner that, activates his role, you'll take off certain things as, that's a quarters because, he really, he was never forced to really play his responsibility as a weak hook player, but he's just playing a vision overlap in a 3-by-1 off the quarterback. Or, okay, the free release of the back. There's a lot of different things that these guys do such a good job of teaching that dictate and activate certain rules and tools. And that's why when you're in offense and you're looking at it, you feel like sometimes I don't know what the heck I'm looking at. So we got to have all-purpose answers and make sure that we're sound, because the days of really just having premier plays that you're just calling and you have a really high percentage of getting it, it's challenging. And there's certain situations where you have a chance to elicit that because of run-pass options. But these coaches are doing a really damn good job of making it really challenging on coaches. And then the most difficult position is the quarterback position. And any of these good coaches in the secondary, they say, make the quarterback decide post-snap and decipher things post-snap. And that's why I think it's really hard to ask them to do some of the things that I learned early on because of the landscape and where it's going. There's certain teams that might still play that are playing at a really high level, but there is a big uptick in some things where you're like, I don't know what that coverage is, and unless these routes distribute accordingly, it's not going to declare that anyways.
I was really obsessed with this. Okay, we're going structurally to this too high place where there is more of a Rolodex of coverage. It is harder to get a beat on it. But I think that at its core, football and defensive football specifically is about physicality.
Yeah.
And so wherever you get to that point, however you get your guys to play hard, play fast, there's value in that. I think the Browns are one of those teams. I think the Cowboys are one of those teams. You, I think, embody in a lot of ways modern NFL head coaches, right? Younger, taking workload off your players, giving guys days off. As you think about how to make sure I'm building a physical football team with less practice time, with this kind of more kumbaya attitude around the way that we deal with players, how do you go about doing that in 2020?
Well, it's funny because the things that I've learned over the last handful of years is you better have guys that are mentally and physically tough in terms of who you're onboarding, because, and I do believe this, the thing that I would say that, I've had to kind of learn the hard way, you don't get better at football if you don't practice, and you've got to be careful of making sure that, hey, sometimes it's a little bit too much Drago, not enough Rocky, where you got to sometimes get into a slugfest. And I mean that, and here's what I mean by that is, I couldn't be more grateful for Reggie Scott, who's he runs our sports performance. I rely on him heavily to set up our teaching progression or workload progressions, different things like that we measure. But there are some times that you got to callous these guys. And you got to have young guys, too, where there's got to be a good balance to be able to practice to get better at it, especially once you get in the season. These opportunities are limited. But here's what I would say. All that being said, tough people win. This is still a grown man's game, and there's a mental and a physical toll that 17 games takes on you. And if you want to be able to get in that dance and you got to play 4 to go win it, or you're fortunate enough to get a bye and you got to play 3, you're talking about playing 20, 21 games. And now they're talking about adding an 18th game. So you better have some mental and competitive stamina. You better have some mental toughness, and you better love this stuff, because guys that don't flinch at the point of contact, guys that can get up, guys that can respond from adversity. You show me those kind of guys, I'll show you some of the best players in this league that have remained tried and true regardless of scheme over time. And that's been a big part of, hey, guys that love football, guys that are wired the right way mentally and physically. And I think that shows up on the tape, and that's been a big part of our onboarding process that's really evolved, especially this last year.
It feels that way. Yeah. Because if you can't spend the time and the practice time to really ingrain a physicality in your players, they better be coming to the table with it. Totally. And Puka, to me, is the best example, right? Yeah. Like, he wants to play that way. And I think that if you look at who you guys were in 22 and even 21 when you were winning, I think you were probably softer than you wanted to be.
Yeah, we couldn't run the foot.
Yes.
Like, here's the thing. We really were able to execute the pass game at a really high clip. But the Super Bowl, we couldn't run the ball at all. We had to run a jet sweep to get a first down. We had a 3rd and 1 and a 4th and 1. We got to run a jet sweep to get a first down. And that was, again, that caught up to us. And it really showed in 2022. We were fortunate enough, and obviously the players always find a way. And we were excellent on defense too. We could really create pressure. We could play the game in a manner that's reflective. 100%. They really came to life. Yeah. Once Von Miller got healthy and Leonard Floyd's rolling and Aaron's being Aaron and A'Shawn Robinson, I thought, was an unsung hero. Even activating Ernest Jones as a blitzer, moving forward a little bit with some of the math that you could change there. That was a big factor. But that has to evolve, how you set it up. And, when you look back on it, you say, we got away with some stuff offensively, but we weren't a complete offense. We need to be a complete offense. That's what the good ones are. They have the ability to do either or. And if you can't, it catches up to you.
You guys win that Super Bowl in large part because of the evolution you had being able to throw the ball against the new modern world of defenses. I want to go back to the day after. What was different about how you felt that morning than what you thought was going to happen if you eventually won one?
Yeah, it's funny. The lies I told myself are once we do that, I'll be happy. What I was happy for that I thought was a really cool thing in the midst of that journey is there were so many players and coaches that I love and had such great relationships that I wanted that more for them. Than I did, to be a part of a team that won it. I wanted to see Andrew Whitworth be the only guy that wore a Walter Payton Man of the Year patch and go win a Super Bowl, and then he does it against his former team. You want to see Aaron Donald be able to get that. Matthew Stafford, being able to see him win playoff games, lead us from behind in 3 out of our 4 wins. Cooper Kupps, the Jalen Ramseys, Von Millers, Odells, there were so many special players, Rob Havenstein, Tyler Higbee. There were so many guys that I loved. Coaches that you're working with. And that was such a special thing. And then after, it becomes a little bit more about you. The disease of me is real, like Pat Riley says. And whether you knew how to say the right things, the ego, the insecurities, a lot of the things that had kind of reared its head previously, and I think it really started post-Super Bowl loss against New England, there was a slow accumulation of some things and habits and internal just, stillness that I was lacking. And then I think when you get some of these other opportunities and what a blessing it was to be a part of a team, and then you kind of come back and you're really, debating, okay, do I do this or not? It's like, the fact that I had lost such perspective and that it became only about that. I'm not saying you don't want to win championships, but if that's it, man, it's shallow and you'll be empty. And I'm so grateful. It changed my life for the better. But what it was because of the relationships that were built in the midst of that journey. Eric Weddle, I mean, what a story that was for him to be a part of that and be instrumental. But I know I'm going on a long-winded tangent because it elicits so many emotions, but I think in its simplest form, the lies I told myself were, once we win one, I'll be happy. That's not true. Because
that's scary. When you sat in that moment and you understood, and you realized, I just did everything I wanted, and I don't feel that calm that I was after.
Yeah.
That feels frightening.
Well, I think the thing is I didn't have the right purpose in the midst of that journey. I'm not saying, because that was, don't get me wrong, it was so fulfilling, but it's fulfilling because the pure things were when you're doing it with other people. And there's a real purpose of, my motivation isn't because I want it for myself. Mine is, I don't want to let this person down and I want to see them. And I thought that team really had that. I don't think, it's not like in the immediacy right after it, but once that dust settles and then it starts to move on a few weeks after to, all right, it's on to the next season, you're like, wow, that's it. And if those are the only things, then it's shallow. But if you have the purpose of going on a journey that's meaningful where relationships are developed, and hell yeah, do you want to go try to win a championship? But if that's the only thing that dictates and determines what you deem as successful, for me personally, I'll be empty. That's what was going to run me out of it because it was about my insecurities and achieving and doing these things and being in control of things that you're not in control of. And whether I wanted to admit it a lot or not, I was a lot more transactional than I was transformational. And that's a good way to be empty as hell. And, that's what occurs if you don't have the right perspective. And then you see guys, like I got tremendous respect for Andy Reid. You talk about a guy that has a joy, pouring into guys, has a good way of being able to respond, but like he ain't defined by these things. I'm so happy to go watch him win a championship, but this guy there's a comfort in watching him go attack his job. I feel that way from the guys that I really watch. And I'm hopeful that I can continue to be that as I am hopeful and fortunate to be able to coach for a long time moving forward.
It feels like you didn't really have a lot of time or space. Like you said, it's so rushed after that season.
Totally.
You're so deep into the calendar. You lose coaches. You probably didn't have a chance to do personal or professional inventory about how you wanted to move forward in the way that you could have done in other seasons. So you get into 22 and it's a mess. Yeah. Right? It's a mess.
It was.
What do you think was kind of the scariest moment for you when you're sitting there with how you feel, with how you're going about your job, and you're like, I'm so far removed from the person and the coach I would want to be. I don't like how this feels.
Yeah, I think it was so gray, and I think it was such a, you were so removed from the person you want to be, it wasn't clear. I think there was moments of clarity. But it was like you're in a fog and you don't really realize you're in a fog until you're able to reflect back on it. Like when you're in the midst of it, you're not aware of it. Otherwise, you have better solutions to attack it. You don't want to be that way. But you draw more inward as opposed to being more connected to guys. You internalize things. And, you know, we had a lot of injuries. There was a lot of reasons for things not to go well. And, you know, I'm not saying that the results would have been different or not, but the spirit at which you uplift and elevate people and the way you go about it. Like, I was proud of the way we ended that season. I thought we showed some fight. I thought there was some, you know, examples of us getting ourselves off the mat. And, you know, there was better examples of me being the influence and the leader that I want to be. But it wasn't nearly, you know, it wasn't nearly what I want to be and what I think the people and the players and the coaches, they deserved. And it took a lot of reflection. It still takes reflection to continuously stay in the place that you want to be, because it's different than preparing for a game and having a win or a loss. This is a perspective, and so many things in our society run counterintuitive, you know, to being truly secure in, you know, the things that matter, the relationships, the way you handle things, the way you move forward, modeling the way, as opposed to people just want results and people want to live, you know, I almost became, I'm not on social media, but it's almost like I was living in a social media where you're living a curated life and you want to uphold this image. And it's like, bro, that ain't real. That ain't being a human being. And I think there was a lot of peace in acknowledging a lot of the challenges and struggles that I've gone through. And shoot, you know, am I totally perfect? Hell no. I'll continue to do that. But I think I'm better equipped with the people around and the perspective and the purpose to not go down those roads again. But it was dark, man.
Remember when we talked last summer, you just felt like you were in such a better place. You had tools, you had different things you could tap into to make sure that you were trying to form that connection to who you were and who you wanted to be. I think a lot of people would get something out of just you walking through some of that stuff, because this feels like this is a human experience. You have a life that you think is going to be fulfilling for you, and it doesn't necessarily give you what you're hoping for. I'm sure that other people feel that way. What are some of those tools, some of those things, some of those resources you were able to tap into after that season going into last year that you feel like really helped you?
Yeah, I think, you know, I think the first thing too that I want to add before I answer is, the other thing that I would say is my identity and security was tied to that result on Sunday, which is so unhealthy. You know, we were like in the midst of so many good things occurring, I became less resilient and less foundationally, you know, just, you know, less foundationally just grounded in the things and the relationships that in the, you know, the values and principles that you know to be true. And it really was, it's embarrassing to admit, but it took going 5-12 for that to really be exposed, where you're forced to look inward. And, you know, it's amazing that you even, you know, think about, okay, maybe I'm going to take a break for coaching or go do something else. And that would have really been running away from things. And having a son on the way was the easiest thing to say. I'd never be able to look him in the eye and say, you know, do as I say, not as I do, when he hits adversity. And I think the best thing was, one of the first parts, it's all about the people that you're around. My wife, you know, my friends, but a guy, Chris Peterson is a guy that reached out to me. He knew, and he had experienced some things that were similar based on a press conference that I had at the end of the season, where I said I needed some time to reflect, and kind of was honest about some of the struggles that I had and the insecurities that I had to deal with. And he reached out, and man, what a blessing it's been, the relationship we've been able to form. He reached out, he said, I know what you're feeling. And you're talking about somebody that's gone through it. You know, there's a lot of things, as you know, as you're navigating your space, Robert, like people that go through a similar journey, there's a lot of relatability and there's an understanding of the way you move and the rhythm and routine and some of the stressors and the things where there's, you know, loss of perspective. And here's a guy that was an incredible coach at Boise, incredible coach at Washington. And I really appreciated that, you know, he had all this success optically, but he, you know, he articulated to me that he was going through some of those things. And he has been an incredible mentor, an incredible friend that we meet, you know, all the time and have stayed connected. And I can't thank him enough for helping me, you know, whether you want to say it's heal or continue to try to stay healed or really just try to become the man that I want to be. obviously my wife Veronica, my parents Tim and Cindy, and these close friends I have, but he's been a tremendous impact on me. And having somebody that's been in this role, and oh, by the way, you're feeling these things, because I would imagine a lot of coaches feel these things, and there was and I think it's a fine line between, giving people a pass to tap out and acknowledging that, no, this is a struggle, but I'm gonna fight this. I'm not gonna run away from the real feelings I have, but these are things we have control over, and there's habits, there's self-talk, there's values and principles that can help guide an everyday approach that keep you healthier and not so susceptible to the squeeze that is real during the season.
What are some of those habits? What are some of the things that you feel like you've been able to be more intentional about, more thoughtful about, whether it's breathing, taking a stepping away every once in a while? Like, what are you able to do now?
It's first and foremost the old cliche of exercise, diet, and rest. And I used to almost think it was cool to be able to get away with not sleeping. That is the dumbest shit I've ever heard. It's crazy to me though, because when your job is to deal with people, and to be patient and to be understanding and to communicate, to connect and to listen, to understand, you got to establish healthy habits that are in alignment with sustaining this when there's a lot of external stressors that the season entails. So it's those things. I think it's being aware of when you get to a position where you're irritable, you're not being the person you want to be, taking a step back, going and working out, going for a walk, breathing exercises, doing the sauna. I think you got to have great self-talk. My good friend John Gordon, he always says, you got to talk to yourself, not listen to yourself. I think that's super important, because it's we have a lot of negative thoughts if you really are cognizant of what you're saying. Well, why would you ever choose to have a negative thought? You wouldn't. But you have to talk to yourself and make sure that you train these habits and develop skills where you're building resilience and stamina. And then I think you got to put yourself in positions to handle that stress. Where you look at stress as an opportunity for growth and you really embrace it and you're able to be reflective, but not living in the past. Coach Peterson said this, and I thought this was awesome. All you can do is the next right thing. But the main things I'd say, it's epic self-talk. I think it's really identifying what are the values and principles that are true to your heart that embody being the person you want to be, and what does that look like, and how does that come to life in your personal and professional life? And then, getting your rest, taking care of yourself. I can't be the leader I want to be if I'm not right. And that's not selfish. That's just being real. And I think that awareness, my self-awareness was very far from where it is now. Have I had my moments where I get pissed off? Absolutely. But I think I'm better equipped with the people that I'm around and some of the habits that you implement that are daily things, to not go back to those places and to try to be the best coach I can be and best husband and father.
I've never asked you this, and it may seem like a strange question. Do you think that you can be a great football coach who is also content and happy?
I do. No, hell no. Because here's the thing. I think I've gotten much better about understanding, hey, greatness requires sacrifices, no doubt about it, but I don't believe for a second pursuing greatness needs to be miserable. I don't. I think the goal, honestly, if you said, what's the mission that we have as a team and as an organization? We want to create an atmosphere and environment that is urgent and enjoyable, that inspires competitive greatness and inspires you to want to be at your best because of the people you're around, because of the way that we move. And you know what? The reason why I can confidently say that is last year was about as fulfilling a season as I've been a part of because of the journey, because it started out with adversity. And not because we finished 7-1 and got into the playoffs, but because I watched guys not flinch. I watched guys grow. I watched guys embody a growth mindset where they didn't let circumstances dictate their responses. They knew they could control it, and they grew as people. And I think that those things go hand in hand. And so I think the answer is yes. And I'm hopeful that when I look back, that from this point on, I can be an example of saying, you know what, it doesn't need to be miserable to try to pursue greatness, and you can do it in a healthy way. And I think it can be achieved. And I think there's examples of coaches that can achieve it, but I can't speak for them. I can only speak for myself.
It was funny last time when we were talking, it was one of those things where I think that you mentioned all these things. I'm like, yeah, I'm trying to be better to myself and da-da-da-da. we haven't played a game yet.
No doubt.
Like all this Kobayashi is fun.
Correct.
And when the wins and losses come, how's that going to go?
Yeah.
And the fact that you guys started 3-6, I'm sure in the moment it wasn't the most fun thing, but there's, I think, a point to be made that it was probably the best thing that could have happened because it tested all of those things that you thought you wanted to have. And it puts you in a place where you really saw that team grow in ways that wouldn't have otherwise.
There's no question. You know, the separator is how you handle the storms. You know, that's the GPS right there. And so we were fortunate because I was hopeful. And again, here's the cool thing. It's not because of the results either. Like, you know, you gotta like, you want to do everything you can, but like, there's so much we can't control. That's for amateurs. And I have to remind myself of that. Do we want to win? Of course. Like, does that mean, like, what I don't want to be misunderstood too is that I'm any less of a competitor. But I think there's healthier responses and understanding of how to compartmentalize it and be able to move forward in a manner that's reflective of all I can do is take that next step and move and make that next right move. But what I would say is this, what I'm grateful for is those things were tested. And I'm grateful for having people around me that will tell me what I needed to hear, not what I wanted to hear. We were 3-6, and I think I was better, but I wasn't as good as I wanted to be. And I had a great conversation with Cooper Kupp, and I love this guy. He's such a special human being. And he challenged me at the bye, you know, to really understand the impact that I can have in a positive way. And really, you know, in a very eloquent way, in a very direct, he basically said, you know, the cool thing, Sean, is you have an opportunity to be a hero or a hypocrite with every single day. And that's stuck in my mind. It's like hero or hypocrite. And I think that was, as, you know, I've talked about Coach Pete, I talked about the people I've been around, but like that conversation really was really helpful. And you realize too, it's actually helped me deliver honest, but empathetic feedback to people, because sometimes I've been afraid of like telling people what they need to hear instead of what they want to hear. I mean, telling people what they want to hear instead of what they need to hear. And Cooper doing that for me, that's how I knew he really loved me, even though it was hard to hear in the moment, but it kept me more accountable. And I think I was super grateful for that.
It was fun to watch the atmosphere, even in camp, about who you guys were going to be and then extend into the season. But on a nuts and bolts football level, it was football nerd heaven when you guys played last year.
It was fun, man. Our guys, and they allowed us to do some cool shit.
And so I wanted to ask you this. So as you guys are transitioning in your run game, and you're leaning into more of the downhill duo stuff compared to what you used to do, what is the genesis of that? Or was that something where, all right, we like this player, and then
I think a little bit of both. He was the best player. Like, he was a really good player that I thought was productive in both phases. But he wasn't limited in what he could do. I do think that there was a big genesis because of the protection issues we had of wanting to get firmer inside in terms of the personnel to solidify the interior parts of the pocket. And then that organically evolved into, well, these guys also are pretty good at being able to remove people vertical. And you also say, like you asked earlier, the physical elements of this game. Like, say what you want. These physical teams have sustained. Why have the Steelers always won? Why is Baltimore really good? I give a ton of credit to those guys up north and what Kyle and John Lynch have established. They are physical on both lines of the scrimmage. And so, you know, Kansas City has won these Super Bowls. They're a physical freaking team. And so you look at it, it's like you know, physical players and tough players, those guys, they win. And Mike Shanahan used to always say it, tough times don't last, tough people do. And I think there's been an important emphasis on that kind of approach. And that organically evolved into the things that we said, how many different ways can we run duo? How many different ways can we be vertical? But I do still think it's important to be able to stretch people, you know, horizontally while still being able to create vertical movement in the run game as well.
As you're building a package, like the insert play with Puka, right? Sure. So you have the dual run off that, you have a play action when he's leading downfield, you have a screen off of that.
Yep.
Does that all come at once? Or do the counters start to get built as teams respond to the way that you're playing?
I think it's a combination of what have we put on tape, but ideally you want to package plays. I think the guys that I have the most respect for know how to sequence things. You know, just like we were talking about these coverages where you make the quarterback decide post-snap, well, what if we can do that to the defense post-snap? Is it run? Is it pass? Is it play action? Is it a screen? Is it a keeper? What are the different phases of offense that you can activate, run and pass, that you can Have plays that start out looking the same that are different, that fit your players. That's the key thing. And I have to really be cognizant and disciplined, and we got a great coaching staff to be able to say, like, God, there's so many good things. You watch these other really good offenses around the league, and they are doing so many cool things, and it's like, man, that's cool. Does it fit? Do we have the time on task to get good at it? Do we know the intricacies of how to coach it and coach the problem solve and the possible things that could arise from a defensive structure that maybe makes this not as good? But the answer is, ideally it comes at once, but it's also a product of what if we put on tape, and then what are those complementary mixers, that can just keep that little bit of uncertainty and create that conflict for those guys post-snap and then in the midst of the snap, really.
You guys had run some duo in the past. Mm-hmm. In 2021 and 2022, you ran 0 plays out of pistol. 0.
Yeah.
Last year was 102.
Yeah.
Which is the 4th most in the league. Why?
Well, really what it enabled us to do, number one, I mean, the start of it was really when we played the Cardinals in week 6. And Kyron had an incredible amount of success running from the pistol. We dabbled with it in week 6. And then it gave us the ability to activate different parts of our offense that maybe we would typically only run out of our shotgun. And I thought there were some things about the run game, the phasing and the spacing of the run game was very similar to being in the dot. There's some differences, but it's very similar timing. You can keep the landmarks for the way you're hitting blocks the same because the back is still starting in the same location. And then you can do different things in the pass game that's drop back, play action, keeper, screen oriented. And so you can just present more pre-snap while not losing any part of your dot run game. And that's something that enabled us to be successful. It enabled us to be a little bit unpredictable. There were some tendencies that we had toward the latter part of the year now that I know, like when you really study it, that people will be in tune of. And I know you and whoever you got on to watch this will say, oh, they had some good complementary mixers to it while still being able to build off of it. But the pistol thing was an evolution, and it ended up being really just, you could say you can run a lot of your dot offense, but you're receiving the ball from a little bit more depth, and it enabled us to activate a couple more concepts.
I think that one of my favorite things about watching you guys over the last 7 years is there's been a lot of intentionality behind the trajectory of when you've been on offense, but there's also been happy accidents, right?
Sure.
You didn't know you'd be an 11 personnel team.
No, 100%.
You were.
Correct.
But you had Cooper, you had Robert Woods, you get Cooks. That's like, these are our best players.
Yep.
And it feels like getting Puka last year was one of those things. He's a 5th round pick.
Yeah.
How would you ever be able to predict that your offense would become an expression in a lot of ways of his skill set? When did you know that was going to be possible?
Well, he exceeded my expectations, but I will say what I thought was really cool is we had a vision for him. Robert Woods was a huge catalyst for a lot of good things that in our offense in terms of the physical presence, the versatility, extension of the run game, getting jet sweeps underneath handoffs on some gap stuff, being able to run a versatile route tree, dig out support in the run game. We wanted to find somebody that could do that. Puka was the guy that we had a vision to become that. Did we think he'd come in and have 105 catches and almost 1,500 yards? I'd say that would be exceeding my expectations. But there was a toughness, there was a vision for him. And then to the guy's credit, man, he is a mentally, physically tough guy. He's fearless. He brought a physicality to our offense. I thought he and Matthew had a great rapport. And so it was really cool to see that come to life. And we were not better without Cooper Kupp on the field, but Cooper Kupp missing the offseason and a large portion of training camp enabled a rapport to establish between Matthew and Puka, and for him to get more reps and more plays called for him than would have otherwise occurred. And so I think there was those opportunities, and to his credit, he capitalized on it. And his versatility was a real fit. And he enables us, like defenses will say this, and it's not like I'm saying anything secret. We're running 12 personnel plays out of 11 because of him. Yeah. And our receivers in general.
I think that's when I watch the best offenses in the league, and you guys are an exception to this, but not really. If you think about Miami, San Francisco, Houston, they're using, at Baltimore to a certain extent, they're using 21 as a way to dictate the offense.
Sure.
Right? We're going to put you in base, or we're going to make you itch bodies up to the line of scrimmage.
Yep.
You guys are doing the same thing in a slightly different fashion. You're dictating the teams because they're not going to play base against your 11 personnel, but because they're a nickel, you get to dictate to them now because you can run the ball. But that wasn't the case in 21 and 22.
It wasn't.
New version of who you guys
It is. And I still do think there are some times that there's some times that you do want to be able to mix up the personnel and add certain guys to the blocking surface if they want to get into some of the 3-down spacing or if they do want to really match you up in base defense. But you just said it. I mean, we have some more flexibility. But I think overall, I think the thing about last year's offense, particularly in the latter half of the year, I thought there was a real change from the second Arizona game on. I thought we played pretty consistently. And I thought we were able to really be efficient in both phases. And I think what was reflected in that is that we were efficient in both phases, so we were in a lot more manageable situations where you're not in those 3rd and longs. And so you're in those positive down and distances that enable you to be able to really, at least start with the pen. Defenses do a great job of keeping you off balance, but you can create more run pass conflicts there. When you're sitting in 3rd and 8 and 3rd and 9 or 2nd and 15, and you're worried about maybe an offset gun run, but you're really thinking you're defending the pass, defenses have the pen. And so I thought that was a key and critical factor. And I thought Kyron Williams was an instrumental part because of how efficient he was as a runner of keeping us on schedule. And you look at the difference between our offensive production with him in the lineup and with him not in the lineup, it's significant. There was a lot of major contributions, but I think he deserves a ton of credit for what he did. And that was a huge influence on why we went and drafted Blake Corum, because he still is going to be a central piece of our offense, but you also want to be cognizant of the load that it takes, where he played in 12 games. He still missed 5, one of which we chose because we sat him out in the last game against San Fran where we couldn't really change our seed. But the guy was unbelievable in the 12 games he played in the regular season and then the playoff game against Detroit.
It's interesting. I think that we've had a reconfiguration of how teams are thinking about the running back position in general.
Yeah.
One guy could do everything, so you don't have to tell space of who's on the field. You guys are taking that a step further. Not only is there going to be one back in every situation, you're going to have 2 versions of the same back.
Yeah, they're very similar. And, and Blake's got to go prove it. Kyron's got a body of work, but correct. And I loved everything about him. He reminded me of him. And they still have some cool little differences to their game that will make them nice complementary mixers, but also feel like, we can call our whole offense when either or is in the game.
The last thing I wanted to ask you about, when you guys played Baltimore last year, it was one of my favorite games of the entire season. Even the lead up to that game, I'm just sitting there rubbing my hands.
Yeah.
Like the Spice Adams meme, because it really did feel like you had an offense that was pushing things forward and a defense that's pushing things forward. He's now in your division, which, sorry about that.
Yeah, I know. You know what? I love it as a competitor, but the respect that I have for McDonald, I'm like, damn.
So now we have 4 or 5 teams that are going to run that defense.
Yeah.
It feels like every couple of years we get a new defense this year. Why do you feel like that system is now something that people are trying to steal from, and what makes it difficult?
Well, it's the teams that are the best, usually get mimicked and emulated and really studied hard. And so you say, why were they successful? Here's the thing I would say going into that game. I got a ton of respect for Mike McDaniel and their coaching staff and those players that brought this stuff to life. What I think when you watch that team, there was a clear-cut identity. There was an understanding of the intent of what he was calling and how they could execute it. There was a great idea and understanding of how to utilize their personnel. I thought they rushed 4 as 1 as well as anybody. I mean, they had a great ability to be able to play off of one another. I thought Mike did a great job of mixing in, pressures, understanding situations, understanding how to attack protections. Kyle Hamilton, I think, is one of the ultimate chess pieces. I love that guy. He and I went to the same high school, but I think he's such a baller. I thought they did a great job of playing coverages where you're like, I don't know what the hell I'm going against because of the way they're teaching guys. They teach an understanding of how route concepts distribute and how you don't have to work as hard throughout the course of the down to allow things to be able to progress. You felt like you were playing against 13 players sometimes. And obviously, Roquan does such a great job with his communication, his command. Thought Patrick Queen was excellent. But really, overall, I thought they were such a well-coordinated and a well-executed defense from the players to the coaches. And I respect the coordinators the most, that you can see an intent behind what they're trying to get done. And I thought that showed up consistently on his tape.
Selfishly, I am excited that I get to watch.
Yeah, no, and I am too as a competitor, but It's gonna be a great challenge, and shoot, he's got some pretty damn good players to work with in Seattle. That I know there's some positive buzz coming out of there.
It's going to be a fun year in the NFC West period. Arizona's going to be better.
Yeah.
You guys are against the Niners. I'm looking forward to it, and we're getting there now.
Yeah, I know it'll be exciting, man. Appreciate you finally having me on, brother.
I appreciate you taking the time and doing it.
Yeah.
It's good to chat with you.
No doubt.
Thanks, Sean.
Thanks, buddy.